Behind every person you see smiling on the street, posting highlights online, or talking about success, there is often a brutal past that shaped them. A story of failure, disappointment, and lost chances that almost no one sees. Because we live in a world obsessed with winners, we forget that the ones who look broken, the ones who seem invisible, the ones who failed, are often carrying the deepest truths about life. And today, I want to take you on a journey through that hidden world. The world of someone who failed, who stumbled so many times that the weight of their past became the silent language of their existence. This is not just their story, it's our story, because failure in its brutal honesty belongs to all of us. Before we go further, let me ask something of you. Before we jump into the topic, share in the comments where you're watching from and what your personal struggles with failure have been. Maybe it's a dream that didn't work out, a relationship that collapsed, or a version of yourself you feel you can never live up to. I want you to reflect on that as you watch. And now, put your device on full screen, settle in, and watch until the end, because what we're about to uncover may just change the way you see failure forever. Failure is brutal because it feels final. When you fail, especially at something you've poured your heart into, it feels like the world has closed a door and locked it permanently. Psychologists call this catastrophic thinking, when your brain interprets one setback as the end of everything. But here's the truth. Failure is rarely final. What makes it brutal is not the failure itself, but the meaning we attach to it. We believe it defines us, that it stamps a label on our forehead for life. And that belief can follow us like a shadow. Think about someone who once dreamed big. They wanted to be more, an artist, a business owner, a writer, or maybe just a person who lived with dignity. At first, they start with fire in their chest. They work late nights. They tell themselves, this is my chance. But then, slowly, life intervenes. Maybe the bills stack up. Maybe people laugh at them. Maybe the result doesn't come, even after all the effort. And then comes the moment, the big collapse, that single event where it feels like the dream shattered in front of them. That's the brutal past we're talking about. Not just a mistake, but a collapse so heavy that it scars how you see yourself. The world remembers Thomas Edison for inventing the light bulb, but we forget that he famously failed thousands of times before succeeding. Walt Disney was fired from a newspaper because he was told he lacked imagination. Oprah Winfrey was told she was unfit for television. The pattern is everywhere. Behind every name we admire lies a brutal past, soaked in rejection and failure. And if that's true for them, what does it mean for us? It means that failure, as brutal as it feels, is not evidence of worthlessness. It's evidence of being alive, of trying. And yet, society doesn't celebrate this stage. We don't applaud the person whose business went bankrupt. We don't cheer for the student who failed their exams. We don't comfort the man who tried and lost everything. Instead, we quietly look away, and that silence makes failure heavier than it needs to be. But what if we saw failure differently? Psychology offers us a powerful reframe. There is something called the growth mindset, a concept developed by Carol Dweck. It suggests that people who believe their abilities can be developed through effort and learning are more likely to succeed over time. On the other hand, those with a fixed mindset, who see failure as proof they are not good enough, tend to stay stuck. The brutal past of a failed person often comes down to which mindset they carried afterward. Did they see the failure as a wall or as a stepping stone? Still, let's be honest here. It's easy to talk about growth when the pain has already passed. But when you're in the middle of failure, it feels suffocating. Nights are longer. Silence is louder. Every little reminder of your failure feels like a dagger. You scroll online and see people your age succeeding, and it cuts deep. You ask yourself questions you can't answer. Why not me? Why can't I get it right? What's wrong with me? This inner dialogue is part of the brutal past. It's not just the event, it's the years of replaying it in your head. Here's where something fascinating happens. Neuroscience shows that when we fail, our brain's error detection system lights up. That sting you feel when you mess up isn't just in your head. It's a biological alarm designed to help you adjust. But modern culture has conditioned us to run from that feeling, to numb it, to pretend it never happened. The person who failed often tries to erase the memory, but in doing so, they erase the lessons too. The brutal past of failure is not simply about what happened externally. It's about the inner exile, the way a person starts living outside their own life. They stop trusting themselves. They stop setting goals. They shrink their dreams so small that disappointment cannot enter. And in that shrinking, they lose the very spark that made them alive. But here's the paradox. The brutal past can also be the beginning of the most authentic life you will ever live. Because once you've been through failure, you can no longer be fooled by illusions. You learn the difference between what looks shiny on the outside and what feels real inside. You learn who truly supports you and who only applauds when you're winning. Failure cleans the stage. It leaves behind only what is raw and real. When you meet someone who has failed deeply, really failed, you can often feel it in their presence. They carry a humility, an authenticity, a lack of pretense. They've been burned, but they are not hollow. They may still be rebuilding, but their words carry weight because they come from the underground of human experience. And so the question is not whether you will fail. The question is, what will you do with your failures? Will they bury you, or will they become the soil that grows a stronger version of you? Now, let me tell you something personal. I once came across a man who had started 3 businesses, all of which collapsed within a few years. He had lost everything: money, reputation, even relationships. By every societal standard, he was a failure. When I asked him how he lived with that, he told me something unforgettable. He said, "The world thinks my past is brutal, but I think of it as my teacher. Success would have made me proud, but failure made me human." That struck me because it reveals a secret about the brutal past. It is often the birthplace of wisdom. History remembers the winners, but wisdom is carried by those who have lost and still chosen to continue. And maybe that's where we need to pause for now. Because the brutal past of a failed person is not a closed book. It is a story still being written. And in the next part, we will dive even deeper into how failure rewires the human heart, why some never recover while others rise stronger, and what science and philosophy both say about rebuilding after collapse. The brutal past of someone who failed is not just a story about the mistakes they made. It is also about the scars those mistakes left behind, and how those scars shape the choices they make for the rest of their life. You see, failure does not end when the event ends. It echoes, it lingers, it creeps into small moments, into self-doubt, into hesitation. A person who failed once may hesitate to try again, not because they don't want to, but because the memory of falling is so vivid. They remember the humiliation, the looks from others, the disappointment in themselves. That memory becomes heavier than the actual event. But here's something important to realize. The past only becomes brutal when we resist it, when we try to rewrite it in our minds, when we fight against what already happened. We suffer twice. First, in the failure itself, and second, in the endless replay of it. The philosopher Epictetus once said, "People are disturbed not by things, but by the view they take of them." A failed person's brutal past is often carried like a heavy backpack. But what if that backpack is not meant to be dragged forever? What if it is only meant to be unpacked, examined, and then left behind? Let me tell you why this matters. Studies in psychology show that when people write down their failures and reflect on them, their stress levels decrease and their resilience increases. This practice, called expressive writing, helps the brain process the experience instead of avoiding it. Avoidance is what turns failure into a brutal past. Acceptance is what turns it into wisdom. But acceptance doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. It means telling yourself the truth without shame. Yes, I failed. Yes, it hurt. Yes, I wish it went differently. And yet, here I am, still breathing, still capable of trying again. That moment of acceptance is the bridge from the brutal past to a more hopeful future. Now, think about the people you admire most. Are they perfect? Do they have spotless records? Or do they have stories of failure, rejection, and collapse? The answer is obvious. What makes them admirable is not that they avoided failure, but that they allowed failure to shape them into someone wiser, stronger, more compassionate. But what about the ones who never recover? What about those who carry the brutal past like a permanent wound? This happens when failure becomes fused with identity. Instead of saying, "I failed," they begin to say, "I am a failure." That small shift in language makes all the difference. One is an event, the other is a self-definition. And once you define yourself by your failures, every new opportunity feels like a risk of proving that identity true again. That's why some people never try again. Not because they don't have the skills, not because they don't have the opportunities, but because their identity has become entangled with their past. To them, the brutal past is not just history, it is who they are. But here's a liberating truth. Identities can change. Neuroscience shows that our brains are not fixed. They have what's called neuroplasticity, the ability to rewire, to form new connections, to learn and unlearn. Just as your brain learned to associate yourself with failure, it can also learn to associate yourself with growth, resilience, and possibility. The brutal past may never disappear, but it does not need to define the future. Let's step back and look at this from another angle. Culturally, we are taught to avoid failure. Schools often reward perfection and punish mistakes. Workplaces value results, but rarely celebrate the experiments that didn't work. Social media amplifies only the highlight reel of life. And yet, if we look at nature itself, failure is everywhere. Seeds fail to sprout, animals fail in their hunts, weather patterns fail to be predictable. But through those failures, life adapts, it evolves, it continues. Why should humans be any different? A brutal past is painful, yes, but it is also natural. It is part of the cycle of growth. Every tree has broken branches. Every mountain has scars of erosion. Every river has bends where it crashed against resistance. And yet we still call them beautiful. Why then do we look at our own scars and call them ugly? Here is the paradox of failure. The more you try to hide it, the more power it has over you. But the more you embrace it, the more it transforms. That's why some of the most inspiring speakers, leaders and thinkers openly share their failures. They no longer hide the brutal past. They use it. They let others see it. And in doing so, they turn their shame into service. You might be wondering, what does this mean for you? Maybe you're sitting here with your own brutal past playing in the back of your mind. Maybe it's a failed exam, a failed marriage, a failed business, or just the quiet sense that you haven't lived up to your own potential. If that's you, let me tell you this. You are not alone. The feeling of failure is one of the most universal human experiences. What separates those who rise from those who remain stuck is not the failure itself, but the story they tell about it. And this is where something beautiful emerges. You get to choose that story. You can continue to say, "I failed, therefore I am nothing." Or you can say, "I failed, therefore I am human." And being human means I can learn, adapt, and try again. That choice of narrative may sound small, but it reshapes your entire future. Let's look at an example. J.K. Rowling, before writing the Harry Potter series, was rejected by 12 publishers. At the time, she was living in poverty, feeling like a failure. But instead of defining herself by those rejections, she used them as proof that she still had more to give. And eventually, her story changed, not because the past disappeared, but because she chose a new meaning for it. You see, the brutal past is not a sentence. It's a chapter, and like any chapter, it can lead to another one, if you are willing to keep writing. So, what does it take to move forward? Psychologists often speak of three things: self-compassion, perseverance, and perspective. Self-compassion means treating yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a friend who failed. Perseverance means standing back up even if it feels humiliating. And perspective means remembering that failure is not the whole story, just a part of it. And maybe, in a strange way, the brutal past is a gift, because only through failure do we learn humility. Only through failure do we learn empathy. Only through failure do we discover what we truly value when all the illusions are stripped away. So let me leave you with this thought. If you have failed, if your past feels brutal, if your dreams feel broken, don't see it as the end. See it as the soil. Soil looks like dirt, but within it lies the nutrients that allow new life to grow. Your brutal past may feel like dirt right now, but in time it can be the ground from which your strongest self emerges. And when that day comes, you won't hide your failures. You'll carry them with pride, because they are not signs of weakness. They are the evidence that you tried, that you lived, that you had the courage to step into the unknown when others stayed safe. So the next time you look at your past, don't call it brutal. Call it the teacher, because maybe, just maybe, failure is not the opposite of success. It is the secret doorway into it.